Welcome to episode 2 of A Pint of Scotch, where the whiskey is aged, the beer is fresh, and the ideas are cutting edge. In each episode, 3 spirit aficionados who also happen to be the industry leaders share our thoughts, ideas, and sometimes fuel-induced rants on leadership, empathy, people, technology, and culture. My name is JT Perry, and I have over 20 years leading technical and business organizations through transformation. Largely, I've focused on healthcare and insurance broadly, trying to bring these legacy companies out of the technical stone age, so to speak. Success, in my experience, has come from engaging people and arming them with freedom, responsibility, and the tools to be successful. My fellow partners in crime are 2 esteemed leaders and good friends, both Brian and Gotham. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself and then throw it over to Gotham?
Thanks, JT. So I'm Brian Ross. I'm based in Edinburgh in Scotland, and my background has all been around platform as a product, platform engineering, and how do we build things that developers want to use. My background, I started off building a SaaS company back in 2001, spent a lot of time out in consultancy, so I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And these days I'm helping executives really understand how they go about getting value by bringing technology, people, and process all together into one. But that is nothing compared to my friend Gotham here, who's been out there doing much better things. Gotham.
Thank you, Brian. And hello, everyone. I'm Gautam Palapa. I have over 15 years of experience leading and transforming companies in various industry verticals. I specialize in mission critical applications, cloud native transformations, and platform engineering, like Brian out here. I'm also the author of the award winning book, Leading with Empathy. And I'm very passionate about using technology to improve human quality of life. And my goal is to transform organizations with empathy and technology. I firmly believe that technology is an enabler and it will help us achieve and accelerate our business outcomes, but people are the true value creators. And so I'm a champion of empathic leadership, building positive cultures, and of course, Scotch.
Very cool. The genesis of this conversation today, which we're really going to kind of talk about retention and hiring and promotion and all that mix feeds into keeping an awesome group of people tackling the challenges we have. This all came from a social media post from April King back in September, and we kind of put it on the list of something we all wanted to talk about at a later date, and today's that date. I'll throw the link to the post in the show notes. But to read it out, April's comment was, hey, tech be like, hiring a staff engineer is 1 rack and 6 hours of interviews. Promoting someone to staff, well, that's a 10-page promo deck requiring months of effort, feedback from dozens of colleagues, approval by 6 layers of management, and then we wonder why average tenure is so short. And this really personally kind of triggered a bunch of things in me, having been in this boat and a part of those discussions, and frankly, somebody chasing a promotion at various points in my career. But it really is with that context and honestly that framing as well. No wonder that we are challenged really to retain individuals, and we also kind of all recognize that really, at least in tech and I perceive in other parts of the business, as I've been in healthcare and other things, that the quickest path to a raise or promotion as an individual is frankly to go get a new job. Right? Well, that's, as a leader, that's expensive and really painful. Gotham, how have you experienced with this? Can you share how you've seen this play out?
Yeah, so I was thinking how to address this particular thing and talk about this without getting triggered, because I know every one of us has had some kind of experience, be it personal or having seen someone. So I figured what I'd do is actually highlight a story of a really close friend of mine and talk about it to emphasize how painful it is and how demotivating it can be for someone who's an internal candidate. So I want to tell the story today of my friend Michelle. She was a really fantastic software manager. She used to lead application development teams, and she was a rock star. She was extremely personable. She was related to people. She knew things really well. And she really liked her people, and the people liked her back. She was a true leader without the title. And that's really hard to get. especially in this particular organization, which was male dominated. Them revering a female as a leader was something amazing, and that was it was really nice that I could see such things and see it blossom. So what happened is the director position, the director left and the position was vacant, and so she became the de facto person. She started performing this task and performing the role of the director for over 3 months. She went above and beyond. She built the strategy. She put the budgets together. She made sure that everyone was, budgeted properly, were performing the work. They were extremely productive. And I felt she was a shoo-in, and so did so many other people. But then what happened was when they announced, someone else who was external got it. So this person, and I looked at this person up, was amazing on paper, had a really good resume. I would say that had a lot of great skills and was really, really good. But did not understand the culture well, did not understand how to integrate properly, did not truly have that bonding. And so while I understood the rationale behind going to this person at a very objective way, because I personally knew Michelle and I had mentored her and I was helping her grow into this particular role, it was really hard for her to accept it. But to her credit, she was very supportive. She helped the team. She helped the transition over. But then it was an eye opener for her. She realized that, like you said, JT, the only way that she can get recognized is by moving elsewhere. So she moved to a different role. Unfortunately, the team did not do well after that and things broke down, but she is in a much more happier place. So it just emphasizes the fact, and this is why I think it is so hard for any one of us, and maybe any of the listeners as well, not to feel triggered and not to feel connected to or resonant to these kinds of stories, because it happens almost every day where you feel undermined and you feel that your value is not appreciated, and suddenly someone from outside is considered much more valuable than you are.
I think it's really interesting because I've had the opposite side of that story, I suppose, whereby, I've had people in my teams where I've always looked to promote internally if we can, for all the reasons you've just mentioned. They know the organization, they're already fit into the culture. We know what they're capable of and what they're going to be capable of in the future. So for me, it's an obvious thing to do. But arguing and fighting with HR and finance to try and get the type of money that we would spend on someone external was just really painful. And yeah, and I'm still annoyed just now. And it's not necessarily the finance person I'm annoyed at. I'm annoyed at myself because I wasn't able always to get the outcome that I wanted. And I felt that I'd let that person down, especially if they then moved on to another role, or worse still, they stayed in the team and watched this new person come in. So yeah, I think for me, it's having seen the other side. I think even the manager feels powerless, and I think it seriously undermines the culture of a team if you can't make sensible decisions about who's going to be in what role. And I honestly wonder about the things that make this happen.
One of the things that always kind of has gnawed at me trying to do that same balancing act, right? I've got this person on my team who I clearly think is, highly of, or I wouldn't even be having this conversation or this emotional thought, right? And then somebody suggests bringing in someone new, or that I go look at something new. And maybe I even find that this someone new from the outside is very interesting, right? Engages me in whatever way, and I think they're going to be successful. I still am dealing with a large unknown versus what I know over here. Well, now I got a problem. How do I handle this, right? And it comes a little bit to, well, April's post, definitely had some snark and framing, and it caught my attention, right? It worked wonderfully and started this conversation. But it's also real, right? I mean, how do you say that somebody that you've had, 2 hours of conversation, maybe 3? I mean, maybe it's 6 or 8 if other people on your team have talked to them and interviewed them and all of that, versus somebody who's worked for you for 1, 2, or 3 years. I'll be honest, right? I almost always would default to the person inside, also for that secondary impact of what does it mean for the rest of the team. But it's a hard place of why I don't know, I'm rambling, but I think we can sometimes find it's easy to find everything wrong with that person here, or their one or two flat spots, even if they've got 9 or 10 just awesome peaks of performance. And you can see this person of like, well, looks like they don't have any flat spots. I only see the good, right? And you end up in the circle that can really be dangerous as a leader, I think.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's really the thing, that mismatch of information, that on the one hand, if as a hiring manager, you can see that you've got a lower risk in the thing that you have already, inside and out. But there's almost like an analogy here around finance. I remember at some point in my career working out that no matter whether my project was £100,000 or £1 million, I would still have to have an hour-long meeting with finance. And for 100,000, I'd need to go into more detail and justify it more than 1 million. Because obviously, if it's 1 million, we're not able to cover all the detail, so just give us the high level. And maybe it's the same thing with hiring. It's this person, as you say, they've got this flat spot. What are we going to do about this? And they don't really deserve this. Whereas if you don't have any information about the other person, you just have to make the assumption that they're wonderful at everything. It doesn't seem fair, but I can understand maybe some of the psychology behind it.
So I'll give you
Gotham,
I'll give you 2 things, right? So the first one I'm going to talk about is perceived competence, right? There's this psychological bias known as the halo effect, where people tend to overestimate the abilities of someone they know less about. And this is something the external candidates will benefit from, because when a hiring manager is talking to someone external, they know really less about this person, and so they can benefit from it. This is amplified by any insecurities that are inherent to the hiring manager, and so that cognitive bias will get amplified. So that's a real thing, the halo effect. The next thing is, for internal candidates, you have managerial bias, which the managers are going to favor the external candidates because they already have this unconscious bias that they know the weaknesses, the faults, the failures of the people internally. So when an employee has been in a company for a long time, they need to overcome all this, be it the stigma of failure, be it all these negative events or situations or skills that people might have already pigeonholed them into. So they need to work harder to overcome them. And the additional thing that happens with this managerial bias is that the manager who is probably looking would have, when you're promoting up through the chain, for example, the new hiring manager who is up the chain has seen the performance evaluation of the individual who has applied for the role. So they would have seen their goals for improvement, their strengths, their weaknesses, all those things. And so now it is that unconscious bias that plays against the internal employees. So they have to work 3 times harder, prove themselves, show documentation, have write-ups. Like I remember when I had to apply for one of the roles, I had to have documentation of why I am the right candidate. And it was like 7 to 8 pages of all different accomplishments that I've done. And that's painful. As an external candidate, you don't have to. It's just a few interviews. You have to prove yourself. You talk really nice. Your resume speaks for yourself, and you have the halo effect going for you. So these are a couple of things that actually contribute to this phenomenon that we see within the organization.
To that end, let's shift a little bit, Gotham, and talk about, why organizations may require a multi-page promotion doc and things like that, right? It's easy to as much as we want to kind of rage against the machine, right? But we've been a part of the machine, frankly, on both sides of that. There are some practical reasons, right? Organizations work like this. You think about why are internal promotions set up this way? What are they trying? Well, a lot of times it's fairness, right? Making sure that, frankly, it isn't just people like me that look like me that get promoted to the top shelf, removing some of that bias. I think so that brings in fairness and equity. I think budgets are a real thing. How do you make sure you don't have 100% of your people at that top, like staff level or whatever your top, senior or things like that. And frankly, you do need a strata of people, right? If you have all 20-year experience, top level people, well, that means they're all going to retire at some point, right? Right. Even in a perfect world. Plus, you need new ideas, and then just a personal one: promotions just because you've been here for a while, right? Right. I've been here for 5 years. I'm due, right? That's a personal hot button of mine. But I think about some of those. Either of you, what are some other maybe practical reasons of why organizations have built this, maybe corporate scar tissue, but put these processes in place?
Well, I can think of one that is not within any team that I've managed for sure, but I have certainly seen it in other organizations, and that is we do not want to promote this person into a different role because we need them so much in the role that they're doing just now. And I think there's a
Okay.
number of people that feel trapped. And that's a horrible place to be, right? We should always, when someone is moving on to a new role, we should be celebrating that we've given them the tools and given them the abilities to move forward and upwards. And the hope is that they're going to lower the ladder down for the next person. But yeah, that's the other example I've seen, and that's not a nice outcome.
The other thing that I've seen, and this goes in line with, hey, we need this person in this particular role because they've spent a long time there and they have a lot of knowledge and they know the things, right? The other thing is lower risk perception when you're bringing from external. The thing is, this person is new, doesn't have a lot of knowledge, bringing in a different culture, different processes, different approaches. And so if this person does not become a good fit, it becomes easier for them to leave rather than promoting someone internally, having them get frustrated and then leaving, which means that a lot of inherent and tribal knowledge will go out the door. So that's another thing why people tend to look at external candidates as a low risk item. And then you have this hiring bias, right? Like the hiring managers, they feel, hey, this person's always there. They take them for granted or they become complacent. And then afterwards, they're like, this person's only going to be here. We need a new infusion of ideas, knowledge, skills, whatever, you name it. We are going to acqui-hire all these things and solve the current problems that we have rather than give an opportunity for someone else. It's like, I'm going to use the example of transforming modern applications. Like application modernization is a really good example of this. You have an app, a legacy app, which probably connects to a mainframe that is really critical for your business and you're really scared of touching it. And so, oh, okay, that's fine, but we're going to have this other greenfield app that is going to come in and start consuming these things. And if it fails, that's okay. But you cannot touch this other thing because it's already generating revenue for you. That's kind of a mindset that some people also bring to organizations, I feel.
So if we think, right, if we go back to April's original thesis, right, we'll hire somebody after a few conversations, but we put all of these at least perceived barriers or checks or double checks or anything as far as hiring. What's the middle ground there? Either of you have anything that you'd throw out that as a leader somebody can do to try to put some balance in that situation?
I would enforce, or at least encourage and emphasize the value of succession planning. When you do succession planning, you are looking at your internal candidates and trying to figure out who is going to replace you in case you get hit by a bus or something else to that effect, whatever the phrase is going on nowadays. But having a conscious effort to do succession planning will already put you in the frame of mind that you are looking at someone to replace you from within, and your strategy is not hopeful that someone external is going to come in and help. And that sets in a lot of things around learning and development, growth, mentoring, grooming the internal candidates in order to replace you. And that becomes an all over positive. So I would start off by saying succession planning is really, really important for you.
I would add that as well. I think that I was going to say that from my perspective, something that's been really useful, even for small teams, is to really think about that career path progression for people. So it's very similar to succession planning, but not necessarily even thinking about who's going to replace, but understanding the roles that you have within your team being really clear about the roles and responsibilities and what good looks like for the next phase. And that's coming useful for me in two counts. First of all, it gives those in the team a view of where they can move next. And then secondly, when it does come time to look at different candidates, we have a matrix then that we can score against. And I think that's maybe one of the things that perhaps managers might get caught out on, is that if they are trying to promote an internal candidate, they perhaps don't have enough evidence to show that this person is as good or better than the external that they're interviewing. I know that many interviews are, it's an ad hoc conversation. It's not necessarily structured. It might not even be fair if they're interviewing multiple people because the conversation goes in different directions. And if you don't have that kind of maturity in the process, then of course you're going to get disagreement about who is the best candidate. And I think that's where biases can creep in as well, right? So I think having a matrix that can be shared and it can be transparent as well, I think is really useful.
Yeah, I think leveraging the kind of both of what you said, right? The transparency, the frameworks, the succession planning, right? Brian, you mentioned earlier, right? That one person that's the expert on that one particular web app, right? Whether it's operating it or developing it or fixing it or whatever. Well, what have you put in place for succeeding that person? Right. What have you put in place as far as training and documentation? And right, if that person's keeping all the information in their head, well, then guess what? You're never going to get to leave it. Right? But if that person's encouraged to get it down on paper, and that actually can even help show how they're ready for the next role. And look, if you want to go hire somebody, great, go hire to fill that role. And meanwhile, promote this person up. Right. From that perspective.
To add to that, JT, one of the things that has worked really well in some of the organizations that I've been is to encourage internal networking. So across departmental lines, across business units, like when they start engaging and interacting and showing their capabilities, core competencies, and skills, that helps other people start looking at the internal candidates for some kind of a role that might be coming up or filling a gap. Like Brian, you mentioned, career progression and starting to move. It doesn't have to be lateral. It can be across business units. It can be across different functional groups. But one thing that I've seen and that I always encourage was to have that internal networking. So every time we used to hold hackathons, I used to make sure that the development teams actually reach out and have a pair with a non-development functional team so that they can solve different problems and work together, so that they have that bonding and that camaraderie. And it helps everyone socialize the value that each internal person provides and brings. So that's another thing that I found really helpful.
Just very quickly, something that popped into my head there was, there's a flip side to this as well. If you are a hiring manager, and JT, I think you mentioned this, one of the reasons might be that you will get judged based on who you hire, especially if it's an internal candidate. Were they ready? Was it because they've been here for a long time, etc.? And sometimes that can be difficult as well. If you've got an engineer that's been working really hard and what they do, they're really strong on, but perhaps how they go about doing it, how they work with other people, they still need to develop. And that's why they're not a senior, for example. That's one of the areas where I think having a career framework in place to really highlight and demonstrate, say, you're brilliant at what you do, you're fantastic at it, no one's judging that piece. But the reason you're not ready for senior is we expect you to be doing these other things instead, which are not in your skill set just now, but we can develop those. Whereas the person we're hiring doesn't have the same technical skill as you, but they're really solid in all the soft skills around it, and we're going to teach them enough technical skill. Also, because you're in the team, we don't need as much because they're there to complement you, not replace you.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's back to that transparency. Also, then I think making sure, Brian, that it's kind of a thought before we move to wrap here. I think all that's spot on, but what's critical as a leader is then you set up that person that you said, hey, you need to work on those things, making sure they have the opportunity to work on those things, right? Whether it's we used to talk at Old Jobs about internal internships, right? You know what? As a leader, I'm going to figure out how to make it work for you to go spend 8 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever, 4 weeks, whatever it is, going doing something over there, right? And one time we did it where somebody was a interim manager while somebody was out on parental leave, right? and just to give them the chance to get their feet wet and then come back to their job. There was no expectation that they would stay there or be that role, but we got to see them in that role. They got to see what that was like and come back and work on that really. So all of that. Before we wrap, any final thoughts from either of you two?
I'll say this. Obviously, we talked extremely broadly and in a generic way. There are much more nuances, especially when you're looking at technical roles and non-technical roles, when you're looking at strategic roles or tactical roles, right? Or an executive role. There's a lot of nuances that are included in here. But at the end of the day, I think what I highly encourage and I would like happen is that everyone be conscious of the biases that are included when you're evaluating internal and external candidates. Do not use the failures of internal candidates against them. Actually celebrate and encourage it because they actually learned more than an external candidate. That is something that I would stress upon. Like, because they failed and because you knew that they failed actually means that they are much more valuable. But at the same time, we've all talked about it in different ways. There are ways to grow. There's succession planning. There's career growth. There are other ways that you can do cross-pollination, you name it. But it all starts with acknowledging the biases and then starting to look at people in a much more fairer and equitable way.
Fine.
I think a lot of our conversation has probably been focused on the leader part of this, the person doing the hiring. Hopefully there's been something useful there for candidates too. So if you are in a role and you're looking for promotion internally, perhaps this is a conversation for you to have with your line manager, or perhaps this is something where some hints here would help you understand the types of things that would help demonstrate that you're ready for promotion. Or highlight, if you're thinking about promotion, that highlight the things that are missing in your team that would help you in the future. If you're not sure what the next step on the ladder looks like, you should be asking about it.
To that end, I would say if you're somebody who doesn't see the things we've talked about, the transparency, the succession planning, the training, the opportunities, professionally challenge that, right? And see if those could come. Or, frankly, that may be an indication that it may be time to find a different opportunity. But with that, let's wrap episode 2 of A Pint of Scotch. Kind of in summary today, we talked about how, it can really feel, and in many cases it is, like an imbalance between hiring somebody new versus promoting somebody internally. There are, right, especially from an executive perspective, some practical fairness and equity and even budget issues that organizations do have to protect, and we want them to protect, right? More than, I guess I just frame that as kind of a legal protection, but those are all things you want for people, right? And as a human, you want to ensure there's equity and fairness and that kind of thing. We talked about as leaders, what are some things we can do? We talked about succession planning, internal internships, training, and frankly, frank and open conversations with our people, I think really being a critical part of that. So again, thank you to my 2 awesome friends, Brian and Gotham. For all of those of you that have listened to us, thank you. Please share your comments, thoughts. We'd love to hear your personal stories on social media or in the comments. Remember, whether it's technology, leadership, or the beverage that you're currently on or will be imbibing, it's the depth and flavor of that journey that counts. We're now on all major podcast networks, Spotify, Apple, etc. Please rate and share. We'd appreciate more people getting to listen, and we'd love to hear more of their stories. And if they get to listen to us, hopefully that'll encourage them. And remember to always, as we kind of said here, even in our summary, keep questioning, keep challenging, lead with empathy, and always make time to savor that wisdom one sip at a time. And until next time, raise your glasses high and cheers to the stories yet to be told. Thank you.
Cheers.